The Center for an Urban Future has been looking into the state of New York's creative sector. Due to the city's economic surge and changing political environment, the center's report, called Creative New York, finds that working artists, nonprofit arts organizations, and for-profit creative firms face more intense challenges than ever before, meaning there's much to be done.
In fact, the report offered the de Blasio administration 20 recommendations for taking on those challenges. From the Center for an Urban Future, we want to welcome back frequent guest here, the author of the report, senior researcher Adam Foreman.
Thanks for
coming back.
Appreciate it.
And representing one of the borough's most prominent supporters of the arts, that would be the Brooklyn Arts Council. We're also joined by their Grants and Services Director, Morgan Lindsay Tochko.
Hi, thanks
for joining us,
Yeah.
Morgan Lindsay Tochko.
Yeah, you gotta love it. Okay, let's jump right into it. Adam, can you tell us about the latest findings in this report?
Yeah, I think there's some really surprising findings, really exciting findings. We're seeing the creative sector grow, especially in Brooklyn. So a 13% increase in jobs. In Brooklyn, it was 60%. More nonprofits than ever in Brooklyn, more creative businesses than ever. And creative is not just performing arts and visual arts, but it's also designers, architect,
you guys
advertising.
Identified 10 sort of fields.
Yeah, 10 different industries that make up the creative sector. So it's pretty, creates a wide span, but from the nonprofits to the for-profits, we're seeing expansion, especially in Brooklyn. But as you mentioned, there's really major challenges, affordability, huge student debt for a lot of artists, unpaid internships. People aren't actually making money in the arts. So there's a lot of big challenges that New York City really needs to take on in order to continue its prominence in the United States.
Okay.
So Morgan, looking at that landscape, you guys interface with artists all the time. So often when we have people here, they might have great ideas and they're doing things, but they're saying, we don't have a space. We need a physical plant. What are the challenges that this expanding sector is presenting for the artists, let alone the de Blasio administration?
The challenges that it's presenting for the artists, it's it's similar to how it is for everybody else, right?
Yeah.
From rent to where can I actually produce my work, and I think that. It's spot on. I think that what's interesting about this is it really highlights the larger conversation of income equality across the city, and it really zeroes it in on the creative sector, both for and nonprofit.
Well, to put this in a historical perspective, they say once you live in New York 10 years, it sort of makes you a New Yorker. Is it 10 years?
I'm only at 3, I gotta go.
You got a while to go. But this report was also put out, the first time they put this report out was in 2005. So being familiar with that report, what differences and changes and challenges have come about since then?
Yeah, I think one of the big things, and one of the things we especially see in Brooklyn, is how art is created. Often in the past, it was through institutions, through nonprofits, through creative businesses that were employing artists, that were creating artistic content. Now it's more entrepreneurial than ever. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Individual artists can get funding through Kickstarter, whereas in the past they needed to be employed at organizations. In terms of producing art, you used to need to go to an advertising firm or a film firm to get the best technology in music production and film production. Now people can do it on their laptop, so they can create at home, and they can also do a lot of freelance work because you have this production technology. You can work remotely. And then also just bringing art to market. You need to depend on a gallery or a store in the past. Now you can go through Etsy, or you can go through other e-commerce. So from production to funding to selling it into market, people can really work on their own. And we're seeing slowly institutions being created that enable that. So a lot of incubator spaces and co-working spaces like Pioneer Works is fantastic. We work all around the city. They're creating spaces where people can be entrepreneurial and can create this incredible content without being employed by advertising firms or theaters or whatever it might be.
So looking at that landscape, we know that traditionally, like we work at a nonprofit, we're here at BRIC House, it seems like everyone was running from place to place trying to get a slice of that pie from these endowments or the folks who are doling out the money. Is that still the case, or are people, this is a twofer, are people like the traditional sort of FIRE economy where it was like New York is financial, insurance, and real estate, are they starting to invest in the arts? Is that pie expanding, or are we still all searching for grants?
I think that's a great question. I think that I think a diversity of income is always a thing that we're trying to encourage our artists to achieve. So one of the benefits of being an independent producer of your own work is that you can, in many cases, get grants, and you can also seek individual investment, and you can also crowdfund. So it's not mutually exclusive, I guess is what I'm saying. It just becomes more of an intersection of something that people need to really attain.
You know, I have to ask, how do you get the word out about this report in that these are the hard numbers? You know, there's one thing, there's a perspective, and then there's the facts. So, you know, I've had so many friends over the last few years that have actually, you know, they were here before I was in New York, that have moved away. You know, some people have moved to Austin, a lot of people have moved out to LA, some people are even moving down to Atlanta. That's a whole nother conversation. But, you know, what is it that sort of changed that are making these places you know, viable and taking that artistry from New York City, and what can New York City sort of do to bring those people back? In that, you know, you're saying these numbers saying we're doing sort of better than ever.
Yeah.
We're creating it, but the perspective among the people that are living that reality is that, hey, I'm not making it, and maybe I need to sort of leave.
Yeah, and I think that's what's amazing is that there's so many cities who are focused on building their creative sector. You know, you had this Richard Florida book that talked about that the creatives are the foundation of economic development. You bring in creatives and everything else starts developing as well. And I think, you know, from Portland to Austin, all these cities are focusing on that, and yet despite this renewed competition, New York City is still doing really well. And I think getting the word out about that is really important because, you know, we definitely have really special institutions that make New York you know, better for artists in other places in terms of the universities, in terms of really active audience members, in terms of this diversity of small, mid-sized, large institutions that other cities don't have, in terms of private philanthropy. So there's things that are really special to New York, which makes it, you know, poised to always be a really successful city. But we also need to get that word out because a lot of it is mythology. You know, people think that struggling in New York means you're going to create better work than anywhere else. It's going to make you tough. And if people stop believing that, then they're going to go to other places. Because why go through that incredibly high rent and studio expenses and work 5 jobs just to stay in New York if you don't still believe that New York is the place where it creates? So we need to like continue that branding, that excitement.
Reignite the fire.
Reignite the fire.
We read this New York Times article where everyone's like, oh, they're all moving out to LA. I'm like, well, I'll take it with a grain of salt because everyone does leave. And I've been here, this is what, 12 years now, and I've seen everyone leave and I've seen them all come back, do the boomerang thing like 2 years later. We just had your goodbye, now you're back. But
if I actually want to add to that and just sort of point out that, you know, people might leave, but New York is still producing some of the, you know, I think from its young people, frankly, just some really, really great work. I think that it is the rise of the sort of self-producing ability to be able to, you know, if you're growing up in the middle of Brooklyn, you know, you have this rich culture to call to be able to create your own work, and you know, it's hopefully we can help to foster that creative agency as well.
But if you're growing up in the middle of Brooklyn, you also have the benefit of being at your mama's house because you don't have to pay rent. That's someone from Tallahassee moving in, because there was just Street Easy did that survey that made news yesterday where they were saying you can't possibly, there's one neighborhood in New York that you can make a minimum wage. It was Throgs Neck. For like $936 you can live there, but everywhere else, there's not enough hours in the week to sort of make that median. So I wondered, that's sort of the rubber meets the road for a lot of artists. But for institutions, how are they faring? Because the people who make the art are having a hard time, but from commercial rent to even finding the qualified folks to stay in the country, but it's like, how many roommates and ramen can you have to sustain yourself to work at a cultural institution?
I mean, it's always a hustle, you know. I think that, I mean, speaking as a person who works at a cultural institution and also who is an artist as well.
You're among friends.
Yeah, right? I mean,
Hustle
this
harder.
is like, and I think it's all part of the hustle. And I think that those pieces that you put together as you build that creative life are the pieces that add to the work as well. And, you know, without saying, you know, it makes you harder, it makes you better. I think that, frankly, I think that the people leaving are the people who are finding, who are looking for a home. And they generally go back home or close to where they came from. And that's why I sort of speak to the people who are born here and raised here or have come here at some point in their early life and have been able to piece together that creative life and use the energy of the city to be able to speak to their creative practice. That is not going anywhere from my perspective. That's what's generating our unique New York creative voice.
Well, to piggyback what you're saying, that unique sort of New York experience, I only made it through about half of the report last night, but there were a lot of components that were speaking to immigrants and diversity. So can you fill us in?
And pertaining to
what this report says about how they contribute to the creative community of New York.
Yeah.
Sure. I mean, I think immigrant artists are so critical to New York City's vibrancy. You know, from abstract expressionism to hip hop to salsa to flexin and other dance forms that are coming out right now. It is in immigrant communities that are responsible for these major innovations. You know, modern dance with Balanchine. It's incredible. If you look at the origin of all the major art movements in New York City, it really comes to immigrants. And you have 49,000 immigrants right now employed in the arts in New York City. So it's still a hotbed. But it's often more difficult for them to get resources because it's more difficult to form nonprofits, to apply for grants. So we need to do a better job of outreach to make sure we can kind of stimulate that continued excitement within immigrant communities because they are so important. And I think, and this is also related to diversity in the arts. You know, we talk about how difficult it is to be an artist in New York City, from the rent and studio expenses to student debt to unpaid internships. So who can afford to live here? Some people who, they have their parents' house or they're really wealthy. Yeah. And that's the reason why the arts aren't very diverse. New York City is 67% non-white, but the arts are 29% non-white. Yeah. And it's because if you don't come from privilege, often you can't afford to be in the arts. Well, so we need to be reckoning with that.
Level, it's graduate level programs, there's a chart in there that shows people getting MFAs. It's pretty Snowtown in there. But if we're looking forward, then you make these recommendations to the de Blasios and the policymakers. Number one, why should they care? And what are the recommendations for sort of leveling this off and making the arts street cred real in New York?
Yeah, I think they should care because a big one is employment. 7% of jobs are in creative fields. So if you lose 7% of the economy in New York City is really struggling, and it's also really a creative advantage. In so many fields, over 20% of jobs in dance, in fashion are in New York City. So this really is our competitive advantage, what makes New York special.
Can I ask you one thing though, like looking at those jobs in those creative fields, are they the people who are going to be envious when people at McDonald's start making $15 an hour because they're making 12?
I think so.
So it's not really jobs that are sustaining you. Everyone does a piecemeal thing. You're working at the restaurant, you're sewing, you're doing all these other things.
Well, the jobs we count are paid, but there are also this other tier of so many unpaid jobs. And I think that kind of goes back to the granting too. We're seeing a big decrease in government grants and a big increase in nonprofits. So when you're seeing lower funding and more nonprofits, it means the grants become smaller and smaller and smaller. And from the NEA, from the State Council on the Arts, you're seeing grants can half the size. So the institutions are getting less money, and what do they have? They have to pay a lot of, or not pay a lot of unpaid interns in order to function.
And you're shaking your head on that one. The pie is shrinking and the competition is growing.
I mean, I think, yes, I will also say that, thanks to our New York State legislature did give our State Council on the Arts a $5 million increase this year, so it is incremental. Again, if I can use the sort of micro example, when I counsel artists on sort of how to create their budgets to apply to our grants, for example, I'm always going to go back to that sort of diversity of income. So yes, you want to, of course you want to start developing relationships with nonprofit funders and, potentially philanthropic agencies who can support you, but you're also going to need to, again, piece all of that together, and I think that it just calls to then back to the ability to crowdfund and, tap into your community and your network to be able to get your work made.
Yeah, and that's also what's amazing. Look at Kickstarter and the success rates and the money coming in. It's almost a lot of it's to New York artists. So you think of
so much of it. I was very surprised by that.
It's like how many times can you call your aunt to say, I got a new Kickstarter? People get fatigued on that, so you have to come up with better solutions. You've got 20, and we're giving you the last minute to give us as many as you can cram in there.
All right, it's going to be tough.
Rapid fire.
All right, I got a lot of space issues. I think, there's schools, there are churches, there are buildings in parks. Using those spaces I think is really critical. Churches especially I think could be such an advantage. Actually the Gallium Dance Company right here in Fort Greene is using church space for their rehearsals and performances. So I think having that relationship with churches is huge. Next recommendation I think is paying unpaid internships. So that's a bunch of things. London has a program about $15 million a year where they give grants to nonprofits to actually pay people between 16 and 24. I think the city, state, NEA should have a similar fund, and also nonprofits, even those who aren't receiving those grants, should be really thinking about paying people who are in those institutions. And if they can't, maybe they they shouldn't be around. That's a hard truth. And I think more funding for cities. So hotel tax is a huge one. Why do people come to New York City? Because they want to go to MoMA, they want to go to Broadway shows. A portion of the hotel tax should go to the arts, to borough arts councils, to DCLA, to increase funding for the arts. Easier permitting so that we can have more performances in parks, in plazas. We have an issue right now in Times Square. If we had performances nonstop in there, we wouldn't need people hustling and paying money if they were being paid for performing in there. So I think easier permitting and grants for performances in public space. That's what I
Anything
got.
in there about paying the salaried workers anymore to keep them in the city? Because it's like we've lost people who moved down to Austin. What's up, Lee? And they have babies and they go back home.
Yeah.
Like, what about keeping folks who are already working here?
Yeah, I think a big element is New York City is never going to be as affordable as Nashville and Portland. So it's about making sure we increase the income streams. It's just as important as keeping things affordable. And one thing we talked about was exports. So whether it's architects getting commissions from abroad, or fashion designers starting stores in China, or touring companies, dance and theater touring around the world, we should have a really concerted effort to fund kind of exports and touring among the nonprofit and for-profit arts. We really think the Economic Development Corporation should be focusing on that.
Awesome. Well, 20 recommendations. Hope the
heard
De
at least
Blasio
7.
Yeah, there's like
administration is
14 more.
listening
Read
out
the
there.
report. It's
The
important.
report is, of course, online, and
Great
you might
read.
have seen me looking down.
Yeah.
I have it on my phone. It's infinitely readable. Good job.
Thank
dude.
you.
It's
I
like
appreciate that.
68
Great,
pages,
thank
you.
but
Yeah,
there's
well.
charts, there's color. It's good stuff. You should read it if you're interested.
It's
in being an
inspiring
artist.
for creatives.
Excellent.
All right. Adam Morgan, thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
All right.
Thanks
All
very
right.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Really